What happens when Hollywood's most beloved action hero meets a talk show host who pushes every button imaginable? What you're about to witness is the most explosive late-night television moment in recent memory, where Harrison Ford, the man who brought us Han Solo and Indiana Jones, found himself in a verbal battlefield with Jimmy Kimmel that spiraled completely out of control. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how ego, manipulation, and complete disrespect can turn a simple promotional appearance into television history. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this whole situation, because what happened next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about late-night television. The tension was palpable from the moment Harrison Ford walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set. Ford, known for his no-nonsense approach to interviews and his legendary disdain for Hollywood politics, had agreed to appear on the show to promote his latest film project. What should have been a straightforward promotional interview quickly transformed into something much more sinister when Kimmel decided to ignore the pre-agreed-upon talking points and dive headfirst into controversial territory. "Harrison, welcome back to the show," Kimmel began with his trademark smirk, already sensing an opportunity to create television gold at Ford's expense. "I have to ask you about something that's been circulating online. There are some pretty interesting stories about your time filming the new Indiana Jones movie. Apparently, you had some very strong opinions about certain casting choices." Ford's expression immediately shifted. Anyone who knows Ford understands that he values professionalism above all else, and Kimmel had just crossed a line by bringing up internal production matters that were never meant for public discussion. "Jimmy, I think we should stick to what we discussed beforehand," Ford replied, his voice carrying that familiar edge that anyone who's worked with him recognizes as a warning sign. But Kimmel wasn't backing down. In fact, he seemed energized by Ford's discomfort. "Come on, Harrison. The audience wants to know the real story. You've been in this business for decades. Surely you can share some behind-the-scenes insights with us? I mean, we're all friends here, right?" The word friends hung in the air like a challenge. Ford leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening visibly. "Jimmy, I'm here to talk about the film, not to gossip about my colleagues or the creative process. That's not what this is about." Kimmel's response revealed everything about his true intentions. "Oh, so now you're too good to have a real conversation? You know, Harrison, I've been doing this show for years, and I've never had a guest who was so uptight about just having a normal discussion. Are you afraid to be honest with your fans?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. What they were witnessing wasn't the usual playful banter between a host and guest. This was something much more aggressive. Ford's reputation for being direct and uncompromising was well known, but so was his basic decency and respect for others. Kimmel, on the other hand, was displaying a side of himself that many viewers had never seen before. "I'm not uptight, Jimmy. I'm professional. There's a difference. Though I'm not sure you understand that distinction," Ford replied, his voice steady but with an unmistakable undercurrent of frustration. "When someone agrees to appear on your show, they expect a certain level of respect and adherence to what was previously discussed. This isn't a deposition." Kimmel laughed, but it wasn't a genuine laugh. It was calculated, designed to make Ford appear unreasonable to the audience. "Wow, okay. So you're saying I'm unprofessional? That's rich coming from someone who's famously difficult to work with. I mean, that's not exactly a secret in Hollywood, is it?" The audience gasped audibly. Kimmel had just publicly attacked Ford's character and professional reputation on live television. This wasn't comedy. This wasn't entertainment. This was a deliberate attempt to humiliate one of Hollywood's most respected figures. Ford's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, and for a moment, it looked like he might simply walk off the set. "Jimmy, I've been nothing but respectful to you and your show. I came here as a favor to promote a film that a lot of people worked very hard on. If you want to turn this into some kind of personal attack, "That says more about you than it does about me," Ford said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his decades of experience dealing with Hollywood politics and media manipulation. But Kimmel wasn't finished. He sensed weakness, or what he perceived as weakness, and like a predator, he moved in for the kill. "Personal attack? Harrison, I'm just asking you to be real with the audience. They deserve better than rehearsed answers and corporate speak. You've made millions of dollars from these fans. Don't you think you owe them a little honesty?" The manipulation was breathtaking. Kimmel was positioning himself as the champion of the audience, the defender of the common person against the aloof Hollywood elite. He was painting Ford, a man who had consistently maintained his integrity throughout his career, as someone who looked down on his fans. It was a masterful piece of psychological warfare, and it was happening in real time on national television. Ford's response was measured but firm. "Jimmy, I've spent my entire career being honest with audiences. I've never pretended to be anything other than what I am. But there's a difference between honesty and exploitation. There's a difference between entertainment and humiliation. Right now, you're confusing the two." The words hit their mark. Kimmel's facade cracked slightly, and for just a moment, the audience could see the real person behind the carefully constructed television persona. But instead of backing down, instead of showing some grace or professionalism, Kimmel doubled down on his attack. "Exploitation? Humiliation? Are you serious right now? You're on a talk show, Harrison. This is what we do. We talk. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come on the show in the first place." The tension in the studio was now suffocating. Ford's eyes narrowed as he processed what Kimmel had just said. The suggestion that he couldn't handle a simple conversation was not just insulting, it was a direct challenge to everything Ford represented as a professional. The audience could sense that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic between these two men. "Jimmy, let me be very clear about something," Ford began, his voice taking on that unmistakable tone that had made him perfect for roles like Han Solo and Jack Ryan. "I've been doing interviews longer than you've been in television. I've sat across from journalists who actually knew how to ask meaningful questions, who understood the difference between curiosity and cruelty. What you're doing right now isn't journalism. It isn't entertainment. It's just cheap." Kimmel's face flushed red. Being called cheap by Harrison Ford on his own show was clearly not part of his plan. But instead of taking the criticism constructively, he lashed out with even more venom. "Cheap? You want to talk about cheap? Let's talk about how you've been phoning it in for the last decade. Let's talk about how you've openly admitted you wanted Han Solo to die because you were bored with the character that made you famous. Let's talk about how you've shown nothing but contempt for the fans who made you rich." The audience was stunned into silence. This wasn't the Jimmy Kimmel they knew from his monologues and comedy bits. This was someone who seemed genuinely angry, someone who was using his platform to settle some kind of personal score. Ford, meanwhile, remained remarkably composed despite the increasingly personal nature of the attacks. "Jimmy, I think you've confused having standards with showing contempt. When I say I wanted Han Solo's story to have a meaningful conclusion, that's not boredom. That's caring about storytelling. When I choose my projects carefully, that's not phoning it in. That's professionalism. But you wouldn't understand that because you've built your entire career on mocking things that other people create." The comeback was devastating in its simplicity and accuracy. Kimmel's show had indeed made its reputation largely through mockery, through finding ways to diminish others for comedic effect. Ford had just held up a mirror to the host's entire approach to entertainment, and the reflection wasn't flattering. Kimmel's response was immediate and vicious. "Oh, so now I'm not a real entertainer? That's funny coming from someone who delivers every line like they're reading it off a teleprompter. You know what, Harrison? Maybe the problem isn't that you're professional. Maybe the problem is that you're just not very good at this anymore. Maybe you've been playing the same character for so long that you've forgotten how to be a real person." The personal attack was shocking in its directness. Kimmel had just questioned Ford's acting ability, his authenticity as a person, and his relevance in modern Hollywood. It was character assassination disguised as interview banter, and everyone in the studio knew it. Ford's hands slowly unclenched from the armrest of his chair, and he leaned forward slightly. "Jimmy, I've been sitting here trying to give you the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe you were just having a bad day. Maybe you were trying too hard to create a moment for your show. But what you just said tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. You're not interested in entertainment. You're interested in destruction. You're not interested in your audience. You're interested in your ego." The words were delivered with surgical precision. Ford wasn't shouting. He wasn't losing his temper. He was simply stating facts with a kind of authority that comes from decades of experience in an industry built on ego and manipulation. Kimmel, meanwhile, was clearly struggling to maintain his composure. "My ego? You want to talk about ego? You're the one who can't handle a few simple questions. You're the one who thinks he's above having a real conversation. You know what your problem is, Harrison? You've been surrounded by yes-men for so long that you've forgotten how to deal with someone who isn't impressed by your reputation." The irony was staggering. Kimmel, who was literally surrounded by his own staff and audience, was accusing Ford of being insulated from reality. The host was projecting his own insecurities onto his guest in real time, and it was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone watching. Ford's response was measured but pointed. "Jimmy, the difference between us is that I've earned whatever reputation I have through decades of work. I've been in films that people still watch and enjoy years later. I've created characters that have become part of popular culture. What exactly have you created besides a platform for tearing down the work of others?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kimmel had built his career on commenting on and mocking the creative output of others, but he had never actually created anything of lasting value himself. Ford had just exposed the fundamental emptiness at the core of Kimmel's professional identity. "You know what, Harrison? I don't have to sit here and listen to this from someone who's clearly lost touch with reality. You came on my show, you agreed to do this interview, and now you're acting like you're too good for the process. Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you're just an arrogant has-been who can't handle the fact that the world has moved on without you." The attack was cruel and personal, but it was also desperate. Kimmel had run out of intelligent things to say, so he was resorting to pure insult. Ford, however, seemed almost energized by the hostility. This was exactly the kind of behavior he had been dealing with in Hollywood for decades, and he knew how to handle it. "Jimmy, I want you to listen to yourself right now. Really listen. You invited me on to your show, presumably because you thought my presence would be valuable to your audience. But the moment I didn't perform exactly the way you wanted, you started attacking my character, my career, and my relationship with my fans. That's not hosting. That's bullying. And frankly, it's beneath even you." The phrase, "beneath even you," was particularly cutting. Ford was suggesting that Kimmel's behavior was so poor that it fell below even his already low expectations. It was a masterful insult wrapped in the language of disappointment rather than anger. Kimmel's face was now visibly red, and his usual composure was completely gone. "Bullying? You think this is bullying? You want to see bullying? Let me tell you something about your precious fans, Harrison. Half of them are laughing at you behind your back. They're making memes about how old and tired you look. They're wondering why you keep making movies when you clearly don't want to be there. Maybe instead of lecturing me about professionalism, you should look in the mirror and ask yourself why everyone in Hollywood has a story about what a miserable person you are to work with." The studio fell completely silent. Kimmel had just crossed every possible line of decency and professionalism. He was now making up claims about Ford's fans and colleagues, using his platform to spread malicious gossip designed solely to hurt and humiliate his guest. Ford sat quietly for a moment, processing what he had just heard. His silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. The audience held its collective breath, waiting to see how one of Hollywood's most respected figures would respond to such a vicious and unprovoked attack. When Ford finally spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with an intensity that made every word carry the weight of absolute authority. Jimmy, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that you just fabricated lies about me on live television. You just claimed to speak for my fans, my colleagues, and the entire entertainment industry based on nothing but your own spite. You've shown your audience exactly who you are, and I hope they're paying attention. The words were delivered with surgical precision, each syllable cutting through the studio's tension like a blade. Ford wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. His decades of experience commanding attention on screen were serving him perfectly in this moment of real-life drama. Kimmel, however, was past the point of rational thought. The host's carefully constructed television persona had completely crumbled, revealing someone who seemed genuinely unhinged. Oh, spare me the lecture, Harrison. You think you're some kind of moral authority? You think you're better than everyone else? Let me tell you something about your precious reputation. It's built on playing the same character over and over again. You're not an actor. You're a brand. And frankly, it's a brand that's way past its expiration date. The audience began to murmur uncomfortably. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something much darker. Ford remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving Kimmel's face. When he spoke again, his voice carried a finality that suggested this conversation was about to end. Jimmy, I've been in this business long enough to recognize someone who's lost control of themselves. What you're doing right now isn't about me. It's about whatever's eating at you inside. Maybe it's jealousy. Maybe it's frustration with your own career. Maybe it's something else entirely. But using your platform to attack a guest who came here in good faith says everything about your character and nothing about mine. The psychological insight was devastating. Ford had just diagnosed Kimmel's behavior in front of millions of viewers, suggesting that the host's attacks were rooted in his own personal inadequacies rather than any legitimate criticism. It was a masterful deflection that turned Kimmel's aggression back on itself. But Kimmel wasn't finished. In fact, Ford's calm analysis seemed to enrage him even further. You know what, Harrison? You're right. This is about my character. And my character doesn't include kissing the ass of some washed-up actor who thinks he's too good for my show. You want to talk about good faith? You came here with an attitude from the moment you walked on stage. You've been condescending and dismissive this entire time. So yeah, maybe I am attacking you. Maybe that's exactly what you deserve. The admission was stunning. Kimmel had just openly acknowledged that he was deliberately attacking his guest, abandoning any pretense that this was normal interview behavior. Ford's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was making a decision. Jimmy, I want to be very clear about something. I came here tonight to talk about a film that hundreds of people worked on for years. I came here to share something meaningful with your audience, but you've made it clear that you're not interested in that. You're interested in creating conflict for its own sake. You're interested in humiliating people for entertainment. That's not what I signed up for, and it's not what I'm going to participate in. Ford began to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The audience realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A major Hollywood star preparing to walk off a talk show in the middle of a live broadcast. But Kimmel wasn't going to let him leave without one final assault. Oh, you're going to run away now. That's perfect. That's exactly what I expected from you. You can't handle a real conversation, so you're going to storm off like a child. You know what, Harrison? This is exactly why nobody wants to work with you anymore. This is exactly why your career is basically over. You're a dinosaur, and you can't handle the fact that the world has moved on without you. The cruelty was breathtaking. Kimmel was attacking Ford's age, his career, his relevance, and his character, all in one venomous outburst. But Ford's response was perhaps the most powerful moment of the entire confrontation. He stood up slowly, adjusted his jacket, and looked directly at Kimmel, with the kind of steady gaze that had made him perfect for playing heroes. Jimmy, 30 years from now, when people remember this moment, they're not going to remember what you said about me. They're going to remember how you said it. They're going to remember that you used your platform to be cruel to someone who came here as your guest. They're going to remember that when you had the choice between being decent and being destructive, you chose destruction. And that's going to be your legacy. The words carried the weight of prophecy. Ford was essentially telling Kimmel that this moment would define him for the rest of his career, that his behavior tonight would be what people remembered about him long after his show was canceled and forgotten. The host's face went pale as the implications sank in. You think you can just walk away from this? You think you can just leave and make me look like the bad guy? This is my show, Harrison. I control what happens here. If you walk off this stage, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. The threat was explicit and desperate. Kimmel was essentially admitting that he would use his media platform to retaliate against Ford for refusing to participate in his abuse. But Ford's response was calm and devastating. Jimmy, I'm not making you look like anything. You're doing that all by yourself. Every word you've spoken tonight has revealed exactly who you are. I don't need to say anything else. You've said it all. Ford began walking toward the exit, his movements confident and unhurried. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's biggest stars prepared to leave a major television show in the middle of a live broadcast. But Kimmel had one more card to play. Security, don't let him leave. We're not finished here. Harrison, you signed a contract to be here tonight. You have obligations to this show and to my audience. You can't just walk away because you don't like the questions. The desperation was complete. Kimmel was now trying to physically prevent Ford from leaving, using his power as host to trap his guest in an abusive situation. But Ford turned around one final time, and his parting words were perhaps the most devastating of the entire encounter. Jimmy, the only obligation I have is to my own dignity, and I'm not going to sacrifice that for your entertainment or anyone else's. Your audience deserves better than this, and deep down, you know it. When you're ready to remember what it means to be a professional, maybe we can have a real conversation. Until then, good luck with your show. Ford walked off the stage to absolute silence. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or remain quiet. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him on live television. The most explosive late-night television moment in recent memory was over, but its impact would resonate for years to come.